Welcome to life, right?
Okay. Okay, red book, what page?
Revelation chapter 12. I need somebody to read, I'm going to say the first
I will.
first 6 verses.
Okay. Revelation 12, 1 through 6. A great and wondrous sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on his heads. His tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that he might devour her child the moment it was born. She gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter, and her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. The woman fled into the desert to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days.
Okay. Now, I want to look in this set of red notes here, this red book here. It talks about the woman. He says several times the church is compared to a woman in Galatians chapter 4. Uses the Old Testament incident of Hagar and Sarah to illustrate the Old and New Covenants. They clothed with the sun, the church is glorious, is clothed with the light of the New Testament truth. Moon under her feet, the church stands for the moonlight of the Old Testament truth. The crown of 12 stars, the 12 apostles of the stars, are leaders and notable ones of the church. The church is built partly upon them, and they furnish the foundation for heaven. Travailing in birth as the child is used in Scripture as a picture of conversion, and the church is God's agency for saving the world. And then brought forth a man-child, the son is born, as illustrated by the new Christians. Revelation 12:17 reveals the children of the women to be those who keep the commandments of God. Since single births are usual in a physical sense, so is a single birth used here to represent converts. This is like Rachel was used in Matthew 2 verse 18. There, one woman, Rachel, represents all the mothers who wept over their children slain by Herod. The child was to rule. This power was promised to the overcoming. The Christian is to conquer. The child was caught up to the throne. The saints are protected by God from extinction. The throne denotes God as seen in prayer, being in the throne of God, and then the woman was given 2 wings as eagles. So we haven't got into that section yet. Let's just review this on some of our background here. Here's, of course, some of the beasts we're having with the 7 heads and the horns. Of course, you can relax. This all happened in 70 AD, and so it was all fulfilled. So this stuff isn't going to happen yet. So we can totally relax, right, Morgan?
What do you mean not going to happen yet? I mean, it already happened.
It's already
Not going to happen
yeah.
again, yeah.
I'm not that old.
I know you are. And that's kind of the human moment. Here's Tertullian. He was a father of the Latin Church, and he was one that talked about the blood of the Christians was the seed of the church, and he was saying that they were encouraging the church to pray for Rome's stability and continuance, for when Rome falls and Antichrist appears, things would be much worse. So he wrote that Rome was Babylon, drunk with the blood of the saints. He referred to the Bishop of Rome as the Pontifex Maximus, head of the pagan priesthood. He challenged Rome's usurpation of the keys and ruthlessly exposed its corruptions of the Roman Church. Tertullian was premillennial. He believed in a literal first resurrection and said that Christians in his day prayed to be part of it. But it's kind of interesting that he's praying for peace in Rome, for the idea that he knew whenever Rome fell, that was the mark of the beginning of the ending. Here's that no one deceive you, for it will not come unless there comes an apostasy first. The man of lawlessness is revealed, who opposes and exalts himself but every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. Do you not remember that while I was still with you, I was telling you these things, and you know what restrains you now? Now we've got Jerome was born in a wealthy family, sent to Rome. There he visited the catacombs, the tombs. The martyrs made a profound impression on him. is baptized by in about the year 360, 382, 404, at the suggestion of Pope Jerome translated the Old Latin Bible into what became Latin Vulgate. This is the Bible of the Western Europe until the Reformation. Now later Jerome left Rome and he became a monastic. He labored for 34 years in writing his commentaries. He wrote the book of Daniel. He regarded that as margin notes of the medieval Bible. Jerome was aware of the coming apostasy. Paul warned of that, but did not realize the extent to which he had fallen away himself. It said that in his works, if they were to be found, the seed of every papal error, including saint worship and the veneration of relics. So that was all part of. But this was some of the background behind the background. Now remember the Protestant Reformation, Martin Luther said, first of all, man is justified by faith, not by the works of Roman Catholic Church. And what was the second? What was the second? The Pope is the what?
Antichrist.
The Antichrist, and that's the whole ruling of the entire church.
Coming out of the kitchen and you probably didn't.
Okay, here we have the woman, the dragon of Revelation, and this is a depiction of, and the woman clothed like the stars, and actually the woman representing the church, and also there's now also almost a picture of Christ being born and the devil trying to destroy the Christ child. And the church is being born and the devil's trying to destroy the church through killing. Now here's the woman clothed with the sun. Here's that particular depiction, and we have the same picture, almost like the virgin birth of Christ. And here the woman handed up her child, and the child was taken into heaven to be protected. And then we have this war in heaven, where the devil, the dragon, is cast down into earth. So we have a war in heaven, the devil being cast down into earth. Now we have in the book of Jude a battle that went on. They were fighting over Moses' body. And the archangel of God was fighting over, with the devil, over and I don't know why in the world the Israelites wanted the body of Moses. God hid the body. But apparently they would have taken the body out and worshipped it like they did Lenin's tomb, or they worshipped like Alexander the Great. They would have worshipped him as something more than, they would have worshipped the tomb instead of Jehovah God. And so the book of Jude talks about a battle went on over Moses' body. So we've had other wars and battles going on before and after. Now, we need somebody to read verses 7 through 12 of Revelation.
Revelation 7, that's one.
Chapter 12,
7.
verse 7.
When it said 7 to
No, Revelation 12.
Chapter 12, 7 through 12, right?
Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough. They lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled out, an ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now have come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God, and the authority of his Messiah. For the accuser of our brothers and sisters who accuses them before our God day and night has been hurled out. They triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. Therefore rejoice, you heavens, and you dwell in them. But woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has gone down to you. He is filled with fury, because he knows that his time is short. When the dragon...
That's good right there.
That's it.
Okay, so we have the battle, but we also see that the saints were being persecuted during this time. The son and the devil was restrained. He was running havoc with the church through persecution, through the martyrdom, through the pagan Romans, feeding the Christians to the lions, burning them at the stakes, feeding them to wild dogs, putting them in skins of animals and sewing them in skins, letting wild dogs attack them, coating them with paraffin, using them for candle lights in Nero's gardens to lighten up the place, the garden. And all these horrible things the devil did against the church. But then God finally brought his judgment against Imperial Rome. And Rome fell, was sacked, destroyed, and became what we call the Dark Ages. But this battle we're having with the great dragon, some would put this battle at the end of time. But there's been battles going on constantly. We have Michael the Archangel waging war, we have the Captain Lord's host appearing, and we have constant battles going on. One of the battles that was against the Israelite nation was during the days of Esther, and they were wanting to exterminate every Jew in the land. And she pleaded for the right for the Jews to defend themselves, and it reversed the devil's conquest to destroy the Hebrew nation, the Israelite nation. So we have this happening in the days of Moses' death. We have this happening in Esther. We have this happening here in this particular period of time whenever we have the fall of the Roman Empire. Now, we're talking about here 42 months, 3.5 years, 1,260 days. And it uses different terminology representing the same thing. He talks about time, times, and half a time. Times is 2 years, time is 1 year, and half a time is a half a year. And 3.5 years, if you take 36, 42 months, if you figure that into how many, 30 days into, you're running into 1,260 days. And so 42 months, 3.5 years, 1,260 days is all using the same imagery, talking about the same period of 1,260 years. Now, what is the 1,260 years? When does it begin? When does it end? Now, a lot of the commentators have different opinions about when it began and when it ended. But we're leaning toward some of Haley and some of Barnes and Adam Clark and B.W. Johnson and some of these commentators. And they lean more from the 533, which was the ascension or the putting together of the Roman papacy, and finally ending with the French Revolution, where you have Romanism being muzzled in France, and atheism became religion for a few years. And this is some of the crowning points of the rise of the Catholic Church, the fall of the Catholic Church, 1,260 years. Yes?
Might explain the fact of the day-year factor.
Okay, well, we explained that before on the idea that the spies are in the land for 40 days. He says, well, you're going to wander around in the wilderness for 40 years, and a day represented a year. Where we get the idea that a time is a year is from Josephus. Josephus talked about how Nebuchadnezzar would be, or Belshazzar was going to be insane for up to 7 times. I know the scripture uses the word times a year, or Josephus uses the words time a year, but one uses year, one uses time. And they're all talking about the man being insane for 7 years, eating grass like a cattle, letting his fingernails grow long until he got his right senses back. And that's where we get the idea that time is a year and a year is a time from Josephus and his interpretation. Revelation chapter 12, 14. We need somebody to read 14 through 17. Or 13 through 17.
When the dragon saw that he had been hurled to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. The woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, so that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the wilderness, where she would be taken care of for a time, times, and half a time, out of the serpent's reach. Then from his mouth the serpent spewed water like a river, to overtake the woman and sweep her away with a torrent. But the earth helped by the woman by opening its mouth and swallowing the river that the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. Then the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to wage war against the rest of her offspring, those who kept God's commands and hold fast to their testimony about Jesus.
Okay, so here we have the woman representing, of course, the church. And in this, the dragon was going to try to destroy the church. And God held back the winds like he did earlier, and he held back the water. He opened up the earth and let the earth swallow up the water. It's supposed to be a flood, an imagery of flood, to come in and wash the church away. And so this is where the church ended up in the wilderness for 1,260 years. And during that 1,260 years, of course, we call it the Dark Ages. The church was somewhat alive in North Africa among the Coptics. But as far as the true church, as we know it, it was not among the Roman Catholic Catholic Church claimed to be the mother church, but the true church was driven totally underground, and it was the church that was persecuted. Well, these were the people called the Albigenses. They were also called the Waldensians. They were various religious groups that were meeting, and the Roman Catholic Church came out and said, okay, we're going to completely exterminate this city, this town, and wipe out every man, woman, and child of them. And they went aggressively to kill, what was it, 70 million people, Glenn, in those centuries, in 1260 years? The Roman Catholic Church has been blamed for killing about 70 million people during this particular time. Now that's not a pretty sight, that's a lot of politically incorrect information, Morgan.
I think that's a conservative figure.
No, it may be a conservative figure, but they were brutal, and it was a bad time of that during that particular time. Now, these are the 7 symbolic histories. The history of the dragon, he talks about the ancient serpent, and here he talks about that the church, the woman, which is the church, will be persecuted by the dragon, and the church will be defended by God. When the dragon saw that he had been hurled to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. And so the serpent's out to destroy the church. Here's the view from the historicist standpoint that the woman is the true church under persecution. A third of the stars may refer to the division of the Roman Empire under 3 emperors in 8313, or may refer to the post-Reformation division in Europe. The preterist view is the woman is faithful Israel that gave birth to Christ, who's the child, and the dragon Satan persecuted the Messianic church, but she escaped the destruction of Jerusalem by heeding Jesus' words and fleeing to the desert hills that were prepared for that particular. The future position is that the woman is Israel, sun, moon, and stars, Genesis 37:9. The child is Christ, the rod of iron. The dragon is Satan, behind the coming Antichrist, as the head of the revived Roman Empire. The Antichrist will attack Israel. And then the idealist view is that the woman is Israel, as the ideal symbol of all the faithful. The child is Christ, the dragon is Satan, and the great persecutor of the church in every age. The stars are the angels that fell with Satan in the rebellion. The 7 heads of crowns speak of Satan's fall, political powers, and authority. The 10 horns are military might. Now, the other symbolic histories we begin with the sea beast, chapter 13. But we don't want to get into chapter 13 tonight. We want to amplify a few things, and I'm going to, Morgan, I'm going to give you another set of notes if you can pass these out, if you will. If you can hand those out to everybody. What I've done is, these are some of the histories of some of the people and some of the positions that various ones took as far as in their commentaries and in their discussions on Revelation interpretation. Now on our first, and these pages are not numbered at all, so it's really going to have fun, but on your front page we've already discussed Tertullian, who was the father of the Latin Church, and he's the one, of course, taught to Rome as the head of the pagan priesthood. Then page 2, we talked about Irenaeus. And Irenaeus was one of the most renowned of the early fathers. In his youth, he listened to Polycarp, who was a personal acquaintance with the Apostle John and others who had seen the Lord. As Bishop of Lyons, he combined a vast missionary and literary activity to evangelize what is now southern France. The foolish doctrines of Gnosticism and its licentious practices had infected the church of his day. He became the champion of orthodoxy against this heathen philosophy. His monumental 5-book treatise against heresies was the richest mine of information respecting Gnosticism of his age. Irenaeus was the first among the early fathers to investigate the mystic number 666, which we'll get into next week, which he considered to signify Antichrist, the culmination of all apostasy. He noted that the curious number was Noah's age and the size of Nebuchadnezzar's golden image. He offered 2 primary solutions to the puzzle, Latinos and Titan. While he considered Latinos to be the probable solution, Titan appealed to him as having the most merit. However, he admonished all to wait until Rome's fall and 10-part divisions before attempting to solve the riddle. So that's kind of interesting. And Latinos translates as the Latin man. Then we deal on page 3 as Jerome. We've already discussed him already. So we're going to skip over to page 3 and go to page 4. Now here we got Joachim of Florence. Now he lived from 1130 to 1202. And again, we're sharing with you some of the historicist approach that Revelation was the unfolding of God's church history, what's going to happen to the church over the next 2,000 years. And what has been fulfilled and what is yet to be with Jesus' second coming. But it says here, he's the first to apply year-day principles to the 1260. And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. Revelation 13, verse 5. The early church understood that the 70 weeks of Daniel signified 490 years. But the 42 months of Revelation was considered to be literal days. It was impossible for them to believe that Christ's return could be delayed 1,000 years, but the 12th century, an expositor emerged who revolutionized prophetic exposition by teaching that the 42 months was 1260 years. Joachim of Florence was the greatest medieval expositor. He was kind of like a Morty Tompkins of his day. He was born in Italy in 1130. He became a monk and later founded his own order and his own monastery. He was close to 3 popes and to the HRE, Holy Roman Empire Emperor, Henry VI. With the permission of the Pope, he retired from his abbacy and devoted himself to intense Bible study. Unlike early expositors, he focused on God's revelation in history. He divided the history of salvation into several distinct eras and taught that the final era was the dispensation of the Holy Spirit. It was imminent. He taught that the 42 months of Revelation 13 extended from 1 BC to 1260 AD. Dante considered him to be a prophet. Richard the Lionhearted paid him a visit on his way to the Holy Land and was greatly impressed by his views on the Apocalypse or Revelation. But Joachim's influence was greatest after his death through a chain starting with the spiritual Franciscans in Wycliffe and Cusca and Huss, and the early formers. His next page is influence continued for over a century. So here we have some of the early interpretations. That's not saying these guys were necessarily right, starting with the year 1 to the year 1260.
We had the idea.
But he still had, he was the first one to propound that as far as an idea. Because Jesus didn't come in 42 months or 42 years. Because he hadn't come yet. And it's been 2,000 years. Next we got John Wycliffe. 2 halves of the same Antichrist. It says John Wycliffe, the morning star of the Reformation, was a spiritual and intellectual giant born in Yorkshire, England, and educated at Oxford. Wycliffe became a master of Balliol College and teacher of the Scriptures. After serving as rector for various parishes, he was made chaplain of to the King of England. Wycliffe strove for 2 main principles. He wanted first to free the church from temporal influences, and second, to substitute the laws of the gospel for the tradition of the Catholic Church. His teachings brought censure from the papacy and triggered riots in England. Gregory XI issued bulls against him. The bull was a written order. But just as the net began to close, a miracle happened. In 1378, Gregory died. And 2 rival popes each claimed to be Pope too, and so you had the Triple Crown. And the spectacle of 2 popes, one in Rome and one in Avignon, France, calling each other the Antichrist, horrified medieval Europe. The Great Schism, as it was known, was a watershed. In Wycliffe's life, he realized that the 2 popes were but 2 halves of the same Antichrist. Wycliffe's great work was the translation of the Bible into English. But also he wrote on Daniel and Revelation. He identified Paul's man of sin as the papacy. His followers, the Lollards, carried his Bible and his interpretation of the Bible prophecy throughout England. At his death, his association with John Purvey picked up the torch. That's when Purvey came along.
The first few popes were really not very,
Nice guys.
very nice guys, or very Christian or whatever.
Well, corrupt.
No, when we get into Haley's handbook, we're going to find all the illegitimate children and the corruption and the immorality among the popes, and we'll get into that as we move
I
along.
think the great thing about John Wycliffe, he was his notoriety was great for a period of time, then it died back.
Mm-hmm.
And in our day, even back 100, 150 years ago, in our day now, he has really come into.
As far as an English Bible translator, sure. But it's interesting thing is, the popes are calling each other Antichrist. Yeah, you're the Antichrist. No, you are.
In fact, the-
Takes one to call one. You know, it's like kids calling each other names. Philip Melanchthon was 1497 to 1560. He was the second leader of the German Reformation. You had Luther as the first, and then you have Philip Melanchthon. He says he was raised by the celebrated Hebrew scholar Reuchlin. Melanchthon was the small stature but high character, affable but extremely diffident. He was a precocious student. At age 10, he was sent to the university to study Latin. By 1519, 2 years after Luther published his thesis, he became the first professor of Greek at the University of Wittenberg. Now, in 1519, he was 22 years of age. He became the university's most popular teacher, speaking before as high as 2,000 students at one time. His hearers included princes and knights and barons from all parts of Europe. Among his accomplishments, there was the establishment of the Protestant educational system and the revival of the study of the biblical language. Get back here to the beginning here. He contributed much to the success of the Reformation. A man of order and method, Melanchthon was the complement of Luther's appealing to the scholars, where Luther appealed to the masses. He never preached, but was nevertheless the theologian of the Lutheran Church, devoting himself to later years exclusively to sacred learning. His prolific writings included the Augsburg Confession, the generally received creed of the Lutheran Church, and in 1543 he wrote a commentary on the book of Daniel. I'd like to read that one, wouldn't you?
Yeah, agree.
I mean, but you're talking in the early years of, and Melanchthon and Luther each held either in mutual esteem, but the scholar lacked the reformer's bold spirit intended to compromise with Rome. Moreover, he was clear that Rome was the Babylon of the apocalypse of Revelation, and the Pope the man of sin and the very Antichrist. Now, who preached that? Luther's second-hand man. Now,
Rich,
yes.
I've never understood why that some scholars, some people have credited him to be somewhat of a radical. He was anything but that.
Well, if you're Catholic, these reformers were radical. Now, we got John Purvey here, 1354 to 1428. He wrote the first Protestant commentary on Revelation. John Purvey was a student at Oxford when Wycliffe was at the height of his influence. Wycliffe's faithful friend and co-worker ultimately became the leader of his followers, the Lollards. Purvey deserves as much credit as Wycliffe for the New English Bible, which he revised and improved after his friend's death. Like Wycliffe, he denounced the papacy, but unlike Wycliffe, he suffered for it. In 1390, he was thrown into prison and would ultimately be severely tortured by his enemies. But while in prison, he wrote the first Protestant commentary on Revelation based upon Wycliffe's writings. He clearly identified the papacy as the Antichrist, and the great and cursed trumpet of whom St. John wrote, writeth in Revel 17.
Revelation.
He talks about the great and cursed trumpet, the whore of Babylon. He calls her the cursed strumpet. I never heard that before. But anyway, of whom St. John writeth in Revelation 17. Sadly, as the 15th century drew to a close, the Lollards and other witnesses were exterminated. And there's that persecution. If you see here, You know, as that brought about a persecution. God protected, but not all was protected because it was still part of the Dark Ages. And Purvis' commentary gathered dust and obscurity. However, in 1528, Martin Luther discovered the commentary and had it reprinted, calling it a commentary of the Apocalypse written 100 years ago. As a preface to this reprint, Luther made an impressive statement. Luther wished to make known to the world that he and his fellow reformers were not the first to interpret the papacy as the kingdom of Antichrist. For many years prior, many great men confessed this openly and bravely in the face of great opposition, and Purvey was among the first witnesses of this age, foreordained of God to confirm the Reformers' doctrine. Next page, we got King James.
Purvey, these guys are witnesses not in vain.
Morty, we didn't have this information back when we were in Bible college.
I know it.
Isn't this some good
You
stuff?
got it when you got out.
Isn't this some good stuff? I mean, this stuff I just come across the last month, you know.
This stuff is great.
This stuff is some good stuff. Now,
Get
King
mine when
James,
I got
King
out.
James Bible. And you know, we're thinking when we were in little old Bible college in Iowa, we heard all this interpretation, revelation. Oh, you guys are just a bunch of narrow, little they called us holy rollers. I don't know why, it was because we got on our knees and prayed. Because we got on our knees and prayed.
No, we didn't do that, yeah.
No, our church, we didn't raise our hands. They did that at the Assembly of God Church. They didn't do that down at the local Church of Christ, but they got on their knees and prayed, and when they got on their knees and prayed, they had holy rollers. Just like those Assembly of God down the street that prayed with their hands on it. But anyway, King James was the only son of the Catholic Mary Queen of Scots. He became King James VI of Scotland at her abdication in 1567. He was 1 year old. These were tumultuous times. Elizabeth had just become Queen of England, and John Knox, who had terrified his mother, still stormed around Scotland. To understand the charged atmosphere in which the king was raised, one must consider the Scottish Declaration of Faith, which established the Protestant religion in Scotland, and was confirmed upon his mother's abdication. Read, "We detest and refuse the usurped authority of that Roman Antichrist upon the Scriptures of God." I mean, that was the Scotch. When only 20 years of age, James wrote his remarkable paraphrase of upon the revelation, upon the revelation of St. John. In it, he declared that Rome was Babylon, the papacy was the Antichrist, calling for all men to flee from Babylon and avoid her punishments. As might be expected, the book was unpopular in Spain, put on the index in Rome, and it was burned in Florence, Italy. In 1603, James became King of England, and in 1604, he initiated the translation of the Bible, for which he's known, and in 1605, the Jesuits particularly attempted to kill him. The foiled gunpowder plot was a disaster for the Catholics. It planted a deep antipathy. Next page. In English, to the English for Catholicism. Unfortunately, James infuriated not only Catholics, but Puritans as well, and his son King Charles lost his head as the religious strife continued after his death. But James was a very powerful and positive influence on Protestantism. The Bible and Bible prophecy was the first and last royal prophecy expositor. Now, of course, the gunpowder plot is they put gunpowder in the basement underneath Parliament and expected to blow up Parliament, and it was foiled. Otherwise, they would have entirely wiped out the Congress of England during this foiled plot. It was one of those nasties, Morgan, that was one of these spy versus spy things.
Richard?
Yes.
King James was also rather notorious for a few unchristian-like behaviors.
Well,
Probably.
Oh, yeah.
because of his tie to being King of England, his attitude kind of changed a little bit, and he was not the great friend of Protestant Christianity at that moment, but the influence was still back in his mind, so he would vote for 1611 Decade.
Even though he was a sinful man, he's still known as the King James Bible, and has been known that way for the last 400 years.
It's credit to him.
You got to give the devil his due. He did one good thing.
God brought something good out of somebody who
Oh
wasn't
yeah,
good.
that was an infallible person,
Maybe he
or
can
a
use me
fallible
too.
person. Okay, here's Heinrich Bullinger, 1575, one of the greatest expositors of his time. Dean Bullinger was a parish priest that had groomed his son Heinrich for the priesthood, but in 1519 he confessed the Reformation doctrine. That same year, his son was studying in Cologne, the seat of the opposition to the Reformation. There he became engrossed in the study of Scripture, which was virtually unknown among his fellow students. Deeply impressed by Luther's works, which were being burned in Cologne, Bullinger was persuaded that the papacy was hopelessly corrupt. He abandoned the idea of becoming a priest and began spreading Reformation doctrine. 1531, he succeeded Zwingli as the preacher and the pastor of Zurich. He continued the Reformation in Switzerland that his intimate friend had started. Bullinger was the most moderate and blameless among the reformers, prudent and strong without being harsh, a tireless writer and preacher. He rarely preached less than 6 sermons a week. His literary output of over 100 works exceeded that of Calvin, Luther, and Zwingli combined. A big-hearted man, he harbored persecuted evangelicals from other parts of Europe and championed the rights of the Huguenots and the Waldensians. He corresponded extensively with leading theologians, reformers, and rulers and statesmen throughout Europe. His sermons were held in such high regard that the Archbishop of Canterbury exhorted ministers to read one sermon written by Bullinger each week.
Well,
Bullinger was tremendously important. He's a figure to the Reformation. Now we got John Jewel, defending the Church of England. John Jewel was born in Devon, southwest England, 1522. Now remember, the Protestant Reformation was 1530, so this is all Reformation time. He was an exceptionally diligent student as a boy. He was sent to study at Oxford when he was 13 years old, Morty. Here's a little stunning. The other guy was, what, 10? He went to study Latin. He was only 13.
They were still doing that when John Quincy Adams.
Mm-hmm. At the accession of Bloody Mary, Jewel was an Oxford University preacher and was forced to flee England to avoid the stake. They're going to burn him at the stake. Elizabeth became queen. He returned and quickly entered the fray. Appointed Bishop of Salisbury Cathedral, he wrote the monumental defense of the Church of England, 1562. This was the first methodical statement of the young queen's policies as head of the national church in opposition to the Roman Catholic Church. Unlike the German Reformation, which began as a struggle in one man's conscience, the English Reformation was a political struggle pitting England against the Pope. For this reason, defense of the Church of England was written in Latin to be circulated throughout Europe. Jewel challenged anyone to meet him in the Scriptures and immediately became known as the champion of the Anglicanism. So he's the great debater too. Jewel is barely a footnote in modern histories of the Reformation, but he was an example of 16th century Anglicism at its best. He studied from 4 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day. 4 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day. Limiting himself to 4 hours of sleep. This habit would ruin his health. He was profoundly learned in the Scriptures and the early fathers, kind and even-tempered, reformed in his doctrine, and a faithful pastor. His contemporaries considered him to be a prodigy. After his death, in the reign of James I, the Archbishop ordered that his defense of the Anglican Church be chained to every lectern in the Catholic and the Episcopal Church. So he became the spokesperson. And here it is, Glenn.
did they deem that as equal?
The guy gets 4 hours of sleep every night. He goes to an early grave.
Yeah.
And yet his Walking with Jesus study is chained to every Anglican church in England. So his book lives on beyond. So you got to be dead for 100 years before you're going to be famous.
I wonder if they deemed that as the same
Well, let's
as
get
the chained
started.
Bible,
I know where I'm going.
chained to lecterns.
Lord Napier is our next one, and this is the one we'll end with, and to be continued after this. Lord John Napier, Napier's bones in the prophecy too. John Napier was born in Merchiston Castle near Edinburgh. His father was an important Scottish nobleman and the master of the mint.
Well, that's important.
He entered St. Andrews at the age of 13. You notice all these guys are young scholars. And he is thought to have completed his studies at the University of Paris. However, while at St. Andrews, he became interested in the study of prophecy. In 1593, after 5 years' study, he published his Plain Discovery of the whole revelation of St. John, which he dedicated to James VI. The book was popular at home and abroad. It was translated into Dutch, German, and French. Adam Clarke wrote that there was scarcely a Protestant in Europe that was not of the same opinion. At the father's death in 1608, Lord Napier moved his family into the family castle. He devoted himself to managing the estate while he pursued hobbies, which included mathematics. In 1614, he published a work which introduced logarithms. This was a very significant advance in knowledge. Napier's bones was a mechanical device which greatly facilitated multiplication. Astronomers of that day waded through a sea of calculations by hand, but Napier's quick calculator, first computer, enabled Kepler to make his epoch breakthrough. This in turn handed the key to Isaac Newton for his theory of gravity. Napier was the first Englishman to make a significant contribution in math, and his popular prophecy book was the first Scottish work on the scriptures. No wonder he was nicknamed Marvelous Merchiston. But he was the first, among the first,
Kind of brain.
to write about the book of Revelation.
I know he was important, but I never knew he did all these things.
But this is some stuff we just didn't know. These are some of the things we just did not know that is worth. We're historically, this position is not a minority position as far as for 500 years. And yet today you try to get historical Bible commentaries. Fred Miller tried to get his commentary into the Bible, the Bible bookstore. They refused to carry it because it was not premillennial. It was not all futuristic.
One of the writings that's put out a little while back, not too far back, had Franklin's declaration in terms of our future decline from the American system, which he predicted would happen and so on. They actually cut that out and left it out for the purpose of modern day America.
Yeah, that's Russell Stern. Glenn, would you like to have our prayer tonight?